So welcome. Good to have you here. Today we're going to talk about how to negotiate with a narcissist. And right off the bat, I need to say that may just seem like an oxymoron right out of the gate, because how do you possibly negotiate with a narcissist? But there are ways to make it work better and ways to make it work less better or worse. And we're going to go over those today. So beginning, I want to start with the worst first. These are the things that we sometimes do and we shouldn't do. So I'm going to go for the 5 things first that you'd avoid when trying to work with the narcissist. And the first is appealing to their empathy. So as you already know, narcissists are almost completely devoid of empathy. They just don't have it. That gene was missing. And the problem with appealing to their empathy is that they're going to see that as weakness in you, and they're going to take advantage of it. They don't care. And even though you think they should care, you want them to care, and they may pretend to care, they really don't care. So don't appeal to their empathy. All right, next, appealing to their logic. Another problem. It makes so much sense. Whatever it is you're trying to accomplish can seem so obvious and so logical, and you would think anyone in their right mind would be able to see the validity and the usefulness of this logic. And the truth of the matter is, narcissists live in a world of their own. Their reality and your reality are not the same. And what seems absolutely logical to you does not seem logical to them. And that's because they have different priorities. Their priority is about how to maintain their dominance, how to get their feed of admiration and loyalty. And outside of that world, nothing else makes sense. So trying to reason with them can be so frustrating because it's so obvious to you. And when it's not obvious to them, it just drives you nuts. And it just starts to go into circles and spin and spin and spin. All right. Moving on, relying on their honesty, integrity, and fairness. So most people who are involved in a relationship with a narcissist are generally highly compassionate, and they are honorable people, and they have integrity, and they want what's fair for everybody. And this is a real bugaboo, because what's fair seems to be kind of like the gold standard. Everyone should want fairness. Unfortunately, narcissists don't actually want fairness. They want the scales balanced on their favor against everybody else. And so if we're thinking of this as a morality, honesty, integrity, and fairness all seem like moral values, and that we're going to appeal to the moral values of a narcissist, they don't have the same compass as you do. And when they violate this, not only do they not go for the negotiation, but it feels like a betrayal to you. Now, that's not a useful paradigm, because sometimes they do actually betray you on purpose. But if they're not dealing out of the same set of moral boundaries as you are, it's not a betrayal to them. It just makes perfect sense to them. So it's important not to get yourself caught in that disappointment trap of, they betrayed me. They betrayed fairness and honesty. Those just aren't values to a narcissist. It's really hard when you feel like you're working in their best interest and they don't go along with it. They don't believe it. They don't see it. It feels wrong. But it's especially wrong when we talk about the mistakes that your brain makes in a trauma bond. One of the mistakes is that hope they're going to change, where they give you just a little glimmer that they might have some humanity in them. And you make the mistake of thinking, oh, now they might change. Now they're going to understand it. And that keeps you going. Huge trap. So important to be careful to realize that for most part, they don't have the same values as you. All right, let's talk about making concessions to gain favor. So in a normal negotiation, this is called tit-tat. I give a little something up, you give a little something up. We both give a little something up, we come to the middle, And nobody gets everything they want, but everybody gets something. That's how normal negotiations typically go. And that's how you might expect your negotiation to go. But it doesn't work that way with a narcissist. They just see that, oh, I got more. Oh, I got more. Oh, I got more. They never think I've got to give something up as well. So obviously they are controllers, and all it looks like to them is, hey, I'm back in control again. I get everything. So don't go into a negotiation thinking that if you give something up, they'll give something up. You can negotiate to both give something up, but don't do it in advance, expecting that they're going to recognize that as a gesture of goodwill and respond by giving you more. All right, this is hard. Emotional manipulation. Most people don't go into a negotiation with a narcissist trying to manipulate them emotionally. But it's so frustrating. You might break down in tears. And for normal people, when you express those kinds of emotions, tear, frustration, fear, even, they'll kind of knock down and say, oh, all right, well, let's make a deal. But it doesn't work that way for a narcissist. What they'll do is simply reverse it or deflect or project. They just don't care. Your feelings don't matter to them. Now, they can appear to care. They're incredibly good actors. But the truth is, you cannot manipulate a narcissist with emotions. In order for that to work, they'd have to have some sense of empathy, which they don't. What they will do is they'll flip it on you, and you'll just feel doubly embarrassed and hurt. Okay, so here's a quick summary. These are the things to avoid in a negotiation with a narcissist that aren't tactics or strategies. They're just the way a narcissist exists. These are high values to them. And if you violate these, they will feel hurt. So even though they can't feel when you're hurt, they can feel hurt and they can be embarrassed. And if you make them feel embarrassed or less than in a negotiation, it will cost you. They will try and get you back. They're terribly vengeful and hold a grudge for a long time. So number one, criticism and rejection. They have fragile egos and do not handle criticism or rejection well. So you never want to put them in a situation where they feel like they have been rejected or where it looks like you're criticizing them. Now, in a negotiation, like in a divorce or in a custody situation, they do a lot of bad stuff. They deserve a lot of criticism. They deserve rejection. But if you want to win the negotiation, you won't win it by making them feel criticized or rejected. We all know their capacity for deceit and lies, and because they live in a different reality, it will only make them mad and make them worse. Next is control. So because narcissism generally is about control, and that's what makes it so toxic. If they feel like they're losing control, let's say you're in a custody battle over your child or over some object, the minute they lose control and it feels like you're gaining control in the negotiation, it gets them. And even if they don't want it or don't care about it, the control over it is still really important to them. And so if they feel like they're losing control, they will react and it will be negative. So don't let them feel that they're losing control. Let them feel like they're giving it up because they don't want it anymore. That allows them to feel like they're winning. So this is really tough in a negotiation because you don't want to feel weak by falling under their spell. If you ignore them, they will get back at you. They need your attention. They need your approval. Even though you might be leaving them, they may be rejecting you, saying they don't want you anymore. But if you ignore them, it enhances their desire to control you. And so in a negotiation, you want to be respectful. You want to address them. You want to pay attention to them. You want to praise them. You want to call out the good things that they do because it's really important for them to look good in the eyes of other people. In most negotiations, especially where there's a court or whether there's child services, involved, other people will be in the negotiations. And even though you don't want them to look good because it might make them, the other people, give them more credit, you don't want to make them look bad, because if they do, they will get back. So you've got to kind of walk that fine line. If they do something that's nice or appropriate, compliment them. Show them some attention and validation. There's nothing wrong with doing that. It doesn't make you a lesser person, and it doesn't give up your ability to negotiate with them in the future, because you're still going to set boundaries. But for sure, don't ignore them. That's the difficult line, because you can't get there if you don't give them praise. But if you give them praise, they then think that they've won, and that's a hard thing. So you need to package the things together to where they feel like they're getting praised for giving something up and making them look like the bigger person or the smarter or the more generous person. Connecting those things take a little bit of planning in advance. So we know that narcissists always lie. In fact, almost everything they say is at least partly a lie. And most of that is to build up this sense of perfection about themselves. If in a situation with other people, you expose those lies and call them out, that is deeply hurtful to them, because they lose face in front of other people, and they will fight back when you do that. So even though you know there's a lie, and you know that they're misleading or deceptive, there are better ways to let other people know if they need to know, without doing it in front of the narcissist. Sometimes we think if we call out a lie in front of somebody, they'll acknowledge it, they'll recognize it, and they'll change. Absolutely not true with a narcissist. And honestly, not that true with another person. If you box them in and put them in a corner, they're going to resist the truth no matter what. So very careful not to expose their flaws and lies in front of other people. The last is loss of admiration. So they are desperate for approval, desperate for admiration. Most of these people come from a childhood that was deeply painful. And this behavior is in large part a strategy for surviving in the world where they've been rejected constantly. And so taking away admiration in front of other people also are deeply painful to them, deeply hurtful. So if you can find any positive thing about them to say in front of somebody else and give them a little praise, it's worth doing. It will pay back, at least in less damage, if not some positive dividends. So the hard part about all of these things is it feels almost manipulative or deceitful on your part when you see this bad behavior on their part, not to call it out. Because in a normal world, calling out bad behavior should result in better behavior. It doesn't work with narcissists. And so are you being deceptive or dishonest or manipulative by praising them, giving them admiration, and being polite with them in public? This is a game, and law is not really about justice, unfortunately. It's about money and it's about control. So if you want to play in that game, you have to live by the rules. So the first rule is don't make them madder than they already are. So if that's the only thing you could do is restrict your ability to irritate them by knowing the things that really hurt them, that's a positive step. But to the extent you can give them a little bit of that currency that they thrive on, they will play more nicely with you. Now, that doesn't mean that it's going to solve all your problems, but it eliminates a lot of them. Okay, let's move on to the things you should do. So all narcissists have what we call emotional currency. It's the stuff they value the most. So it comes down to basically one of these four things. It's money, status, praise, or control. For some people, it's all of these. For some, it's some combination. For some, it's only one. But when you're trying to motivate them and you're trying to get an exchange like, well, I'll give you the dishes if you'll give me the stereo, that's not really the currency they value. What they really want is money, status, praise, or control. So to the extent you can feed that currency, they'll give up the other currency. So bearing in mind what they really care about, what they really want, will give you a lot more control over your negotiations. And when I say that, what I'm talking about is, we talked earlier about the tit for tat. I'll do this if you'll do that. And we think, I'll trade this object if you'll give me the object. But for them, it's not usually about the objects. I mean, sometimes it is, but mostly it's how they look to others. That's what's most important to them. And it's about the control they have over you. So knowing when you go into it, what do they care the most about? Now, if you've lived with them for any period of time, you already know what they need and what they want, because they act nice when they get it. They don't act nice when they don't get it. So be aware of the things that they really need and want, so that strategically you can use those when you're trying to trade for something that you want. Let's take just a hypothetical example. Let's say that you have heirloom china that you inherited from your grandmother, and you have a daughter between you. Let's say she's a 12-year-old, and he does not care about the china, but it happens to be in his possession. And it's your china, but he doesn't want to give it up. And you want to have it because you want your daughter to get it. He's withholding it because it gives him power and control over you, and that makes him really happy when it upsets you. So how do we find currency for him to be able to give it to your daughter? Well, rather than have him give it to you, first of all, that's one barrier. Let's not have him give it to you. Let's find a way where he can look like the bigger person, like for some reason you're the bad person, that you've been trying to keep this for yourself. Let him be the person that gives it to your daughter as part of the settlement instead of to you. That way we're preserving praise and control and status on his part, but you still get the outcome you want, which is for your daughter to get the china. But because she's 12 years old, she's still going to put it in your care until that happens. But that's between you and her, not him. Number two, keep emotions out of it. So we've talked about this a little bit before, but oh my, this is really hard when you get into a negotiation and they know which buttons to push that really fire you up. You have to have prepared in advance. And a lot of the work we do outside of this, especially the tapping and some of the spinning, to help you release the connection of the high emotion from the fact or the situation, is really powerful to have before going into a negotiation. You need to be able to be calm, collected, dispassionate. You have to act like you don't care, but you're still engaged. So when we think of gray rock, that's what we're looking for. We don't want to express any emotion. Why? Because that's your motivation. The minute the narcissist can see that you're angry or you're sad, he knows, she cares about this. I'm going to use that against her. But if you're just like, yeah, I don't care. Yeah, that's China. It would be nice if it went to our daughter, but I don't really have an emotional attachment to it one way or the other. I think it would be nice if she could get it, but it doesn't really matter to me. Well, of course it matters to you. You're going to actually, and I hate to say this, but you're going to play the game. You're going to play the same game he's playing, and you're going to not show any of that emotional attachment that you have to the China, going back to that example that we just used. Because if you do, he's going to use it against you. You're just going to be neutral or gray rock. Yeah, I don't really care about it, but we've got it. It would be nice if we could keep it in the family for our daughter. That's a way of keeping your emotions out of it so that he doesn't feel the need to take it away from you. Okay. Boundaries. So boundaries, unfortunately, you don't usually recognize them until they've been violated. And so finding a way to set a boundary usually is the result of having been pushed over the boundary. Your narcissist has already figured out, because they know which buttons to push, what your boundaries are. And if you let down one of those boundaries, then they're thinking they're winning. So how do we keep some kind of level of boundary without letting them feel like they've won, but without also giving them a target where they know, I'm going to violate that boundary because I know how mad it makes you. That's a really difficult thing, but you have to be able to say it. And so how you respond to their violation of a boundary is how we enforce it. If they violate your boundary and you become highly emotional, the boundary didn't work for you. If he violates your boundary and you just say, that's one of my boundaries, that's not going to work for me. But there's no emotion, there's no overdue excitement about it, then you've reinforced the boundary. Yeah, he violated it already, so we're not going to fight over that again. And he knows that you care, but he doesn't have control over you by making you emotional about it. So that's the difficult part and the good part about boundaries. Set them, but don't become emotional about them. Use written agreements. This just kind of goes without saying, but when you're in court or you're with child advocates or other people who are involved in this process, you don't want to throw a document down and say, sign this. But once you have had some kind of a negotiated agreement, you do want to say, why don't we get that written down so that we all know what we agreed to and there's no confusing it in the future. There's a difference between saying, let's get written down so we don't have any confusion versus let's get this written down so I can enforce it and I can show you where you're wrong. I can blame you and I can take you back to court. Unfortunately, because there's a lot of acrimony in divorces and breakups, that's really what you want. You want some way to enforce an agreement. And yes, that's why we have them written down. But if that's the approach you take in talking about them and presenting them, it's never going to work. They're going to fight against that all the way. So we always want to say, this is for both of our benefits. You don't want me doing anything that's going to upset you and having to take me back to court, and vice versa. We both want to eliminate and minimize the amount of time and energy and money we have to spend on this in the future. That's a mutual benefit. That's not control, but it benefits everybody, and everybody gets to maintain their face and be safe. So this is just good judgment. Written agreements. This also says that all of your other communication, where possible, should be written down. So when you're negotiating with a partner, let's say over holidays or something like that, even if you have a verbal conversation where you agree to something, always end by saying, I'm going to put that down in writing so that we don't forget about it in the future. And I'll send it to you in an email or I'll send it on our 3-party app. Always follow up with written documentation. Now that's good for general communication, but if you end up going to court again, that's what will be relied on, not your conversation. It will be the written documented evidence. So always assume that anytime anything happens, it needs to be documented. Even if it's just a note in your computer or an email that you send yourself or your therapist, write everything down. All right. Because a narcissist cares so much how they look in front of other people, it's sometimes more effective to have your negotiations with a third party present. In some cases, in the worst cases, it's a judge. In other cases, it might be therapists or other counselors, parties that are involved, and help your partner look good, but also want to look good. So when he's with you, he doesn't care. He's happy to be mean, malicious, rude, but he's probably not going to want to look that way to other people. I mean, they go to great lengths to look better to others than they do to you. So when you have the opportunity, let other people be involved. And in those occasions, be very careful not to make the narcissist look bad. Don't call out his flaws and all of his lies. And yes, but you said you were going to do this and you didn't do it. Always think of mutual benefit, how this is going to benefit your child or some other third party, so that he doesn't have to look at how is this benefiting you. Okay, so let's talk about the magic phrases. Undoubtedly, you're going to be in situations where you do get emotional. That's the nature of these narcissistic negotiations. You care, and he doesn't care about how you feel. And what he really is looking for is, how can I make your life miserable? How can I show more control? How can I have more dominance over you? So how do you get out of those situations without accusing them or attacking them or feeling really defensive? These are 5 phrases that are time tested and work over and over and over again. Rather than saying, you dirty dog, you've gone back on your agreement, you're cheating me again, you say, gee, you know, that doesn't really work for me. This allows you to say, here's a boundary, but it does it without getting emotional or defensive. It's just, that doesn't work for me. And he's stuck. Where does he go? What is he going to attack? He might say, well, what do you mean it doesn't work for you? It just doesn't work for me. Well, what are you going to do? Make another offer. How are we going to solve this? Assuming that he asks those questions. Then your next callback is, well, let me think about it. Or let me think about it and get back to you. And of course, you never intend to think about it and you never intend to get back, but it puts them off and it keeps you from overreacting or acting emotionally or going to those 5 things that we don't really want to do, which is where you take control or you you make them look bad or you call out their lies. This prevents you from doing that and creating a bigger problem. Now, let's say that you're in the process of negotiating or he's asking you to do something. Let's say he's making an unreasonable request. You don't want to say no and give him something to fight against. What you could say is, you know, something doesn't feel right. It's very hard for him to debate or question how you feel. If you say that's not right, he will debate that. If you say you're wrong, he will debate that. But if you say, this is how I'm feeling, for example, something doesn't feel right, then his response is, oh, what do you do with that? That's much more difficult for them to deal with. So that number 4 is extremely useful. It's a great get out of jail card. You know, something just doesn't feel right about this. Well, what? I don't know. Maybe you could help me understand. And then you ask more questions, ask for more clarification, involve him in solving the problem. Now, the last one is your bailout. Sometimes they will just want to get in a fight with you and want you to stay in the fight because they know how it makes them feel powerful and great and useful, and it upsets you. So how do you break away without accusing them or pointing a finger at them or making them even more judgmental? And the answer is, I'm really kind of feeling overwhelmed right now. I need a break. Very hard for them to fight back against that. So I have a client who has a very demanding husband. She's married to a narcissist, and because of a lot of other political and other considerations, is trying to make that relationship work. But he frequently is abusing her, taking advantage of her. I mean, emotionally, bossing her around, controlling her. And she just gets pinned up against the wall and doesn't know how to get out of it. And so what I've taught her to do is simply say, gee, you know, I'm feeling really overwhelmed right now. I think I need a rest, or I think I need a break. And automatically, you know, it's not accusatory, it's not defaming, it's just, I don't feel well. It's like saying, I got to go to the bathroom. They let you. I'm feeling overwhelmed. I need to go lay down. Okay, good. And that breaks the tension of the moment and allows you both to go back to your corners and renegotiate to come back again. All right. So this is closing the deal. There's just some extra tips on when you're in a negotiation or an argument or a discussion or any kind of a conflict. Speak their language. Their language is about their currency. Talk about the things they care about. I know you don't want to look bad in front of so-and-so. I know you don't want to appear like you haven't complied with the judge. Let's work this out. When you help them solve the problem that they actually have, which is getting more of their currency, which is money, control, respect, admiration, and you help them get that, they are more responsive. But there's a more deep of that, and that is to use their exact words. So here's a phrase I want you to remember. The truest words a person ever hears are the ones that just came out of their own mouth. No matter what you say, no matter how true it is to you, it doesn't have the same level of truth to them. But what they say, because they just said it, is absolutely true to them. So when they're talking to you, before you respond, especially if it's something mean or abusive or rude, repeat back the last 1 to 3 of their own words. So let's say that their habit is telling you that you're lazy. You're just so lazy. You might come back and say, lazy. Yes, you're so lazy. What just happened is very subtle, but by repeating back their own word and having it feel true to them, they feel somewhat understood and validated. And that gives you a little less control from them and a little more control for you. So using their exact words wherever you can, working them into the conversation, however you can, helps them feel more understood. And feeling understood does build trust to the extent that it's possible with the narcissist. Next is always keep in mind what it is that they value. They don't value things as much as the power of things to hurt you. What they value is admiration, in some cases money, and in some cases control. So do your best to organize whatever your requests and your negotiations are to make sure they get that so that they can then give up what you care about. One of the things is be indifferent about what you want. This is the gray rock. Yeah, that China, I'm going back to the example of the China. Yeah, I know I cared a lot about it back in the day, but so much has happened, it really doesn't make that much difference to me anymore. Why don't we just, how would you like to do this? I think our daughter would probably like to have it someday. What makes the sense to you? Well, now it's not about you anymore, so they don't have you as the dog to kick. So being less emotional about what you want helps them be less emotional about taking it away from you. All right, so that's kind of a summary. Thank you for your attendance and participation.